on the record. Bring it on.
You know, you've had such an amazing career. Probably couldn't even imagine this before you first started out. I wondered, what was your original musical dream just when you were first starting? Where did you
Well, I
want to go?
started to say, when I was working when I was going to school in Chicago, I got this job because a drummer got drunk or drugged out or something, and
Okay.
one of the dancers who lived in the hotel where I lived called me and said, "Could you come over here quickly? We need a drummer. The drummer has been fired, or he fell down or something, whatever." And so I immediately ran up I jumped on the trolley. It was only 5-6 blocks away. And I walked in and I jumped on the drums. It was a fine drummer who was there. He was Harry James' drummer.
Oh, God, wow.
And I took over his drums,
Yeah.
and I played. And of course, every nightclub in Chicago was run by what they called the Outfit.
Okay.
Kind of a high-class name for the mafia.
Okay, I was wondering if we were going there. Yeah, okay, got it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and it seems like from that night, the owners of Vince and Tony used to come out and talk to me. They'd say, "Hey, kid, you play nice, and you don't smoke those crazy cigarettes." I said, "No."
Yeah.
And eventually, after a couple nights, they said, "You got your own drums?" I said, "Yeah." They said, "Bring them in, and we'll get rid of those drums, and we want to give you a job." He said, "I'll give you $100 a quarter a week." And I said, "My God."
That's good money.
It
Yeah.
was amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was a lot of money.
Yeah.
And the hysterical part about it is that when Vince or Tony would call you into the office, it was usually to run down something. Somebody did something.
Okay. Yeah.
But in my case, every time I went in there, I was getting compliments.
Wow. Fantastic.
So at one point, it was either Vince or Tony, they opened up this big drapery, and there's a set of drums sitting there.
Wow.
And it turned out that either Vince or Tony was kind of fooling around with drums. They love drums.
That's fantastic. Everybody's a
But-
drummer, right? Yeah.
But as I worked for these girls, and every night it was 10, 12, 14 girls, and you're sight reading music.
Yeah.
I'm studying all day and I'm playing all night.
Yes.
And every one of these girls practically would come to me and say, "You know, you have a certain way for playing my music." And it was just three of us.
Wow.
Piano, drums, and trumpet. That
Yeah.
was the band, no bass.
Right. Amazing.
I mean, it really was amazing. If I had to go to the bathroom, the piano player jumped on the drums.
Is that right?
The trumpet player jumped on the drums.
Wow.
If the piano player had to go to the bathroom, I would jump on the piano
Is that right?
because I could play a few chords.
Sure.
And these girls' music, and they had full arrangements. And so, you know, invention is a necessity, I guess,
Yes.
of certain things. And I was inventing little things that would be noisemakers or whatever, cymbal flares, various things just to fill up their music. And these gals used to come to me and they say, "You know, Hal, we never had a drummer play this way. It was just you're just such a accompanist for us." And I learned very quickly, very young. I learned that I was an accompanist.
Yes.
I wasn't, and there was no way as I progressed and became more sophisticated and so forth. I was never going to be a Gene Krupa or a Buddy Rich. I never thought about that.
Yeah.
Never knew I would be with Elvis Presley or Frank Sinatra or any of the Sinatras.
Absolutely.
I recorded with all of them.
Yes.
I became Nancy Sinatra's drummer for 33 years.
That's incredible.
We both retired together.
Right. Wow. Yeah. These both in studio and on tour, correct?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Can you say a little bit of the difference between being in the studio, Hal, and going on tour? How did you have to approach it? What were some similarities and differences there?
You know, when we would do a concert, I would do a concert once in a while with Sonny and Cher, with Jan and Dean, who were very, very big in those days.
Yes, absolutely.
I can't even think of everybody right now. I rarely did those kind of jobs, but it was fun to see an audience out there.
Yeah.
And it makes you play great. But I always felt that I was playing good or great in the studios.
Yeah.
But without the audience watching us.
Right. Yeah.
Who was watching us were the contractors, the songwriters, the artists themselves.
They were with you, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Everything was done live, mostly in those days. It was one track.
Right. Absolutely.
And until Larry Levine, one of the great engineers, and Bones Howe, one of the super great engineers, who was also a drummer, they came along and they learned how to split tracks. All of a sudden we had 2 tracks.
Yes.
So they learned that we could, what they called ping-ponging. And with the ping-ponging, they could now create more tracks because they could take everything off of track 2, put it on track 1, and now track 2 was open.
Yeah.
And we could do overdubs. We could do, jingle bells, whatever we had to do.
Yes.
And little by little, you don't realize you're studying these things. It's an education in itself.
Absolutely. Learning as you
and
go.
People like Bones Howe, when I started with Elvis, people like Bones Howe, who loved my drumming, and he was a great jazz drummer.
Yeah.
Bones wouldn't do a date without me.
Wow.
And so, the reputation gets out real quick.
Yes.
That this wrecking crew, they do not wreck music whatsoever, but they're doing nothing but hit records.
That's right.
And so producers started coming from all over Europe, all the major cities in Europe, from South America, from Mexico. I mean, it was unbelievable.
Absolutely.
Just
incredible.
Unbelievable.
Go ahead.
That was the reputation that just went around so quickly. And as I've said many times, it was like falling into a vat of chocolate.
Yeah. What?
Because it was, there was a saying around the union. We used to get our checks at the union. So once a week or once every 2 weeks, you'd go to the union and pick up all these work checks that you'd been doing for the last week or 2.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about 3 and 4 and 5 dates a day sometimes. I did as many as 7.
7. Wow.
Those were 3-hour sessions.
Wow.
Except that there were times during a 3-hour session that a producer would come in on a 5-minute break and come into our date and say, Hal, we need the tambourine on the song we're doing. Could you pop over?
Yeah.
And they put you on a contract.
Amazing.
So now it's another contract.
Yeah.
And pretty soon another producer would come in from another studio, say, Hal, we need a bongo drum on this particular commercial.
Yeah.
So now you're getting a commercial call.
Yeah.
Well, one day I had 7 of those calls. I had 3 regular big long calls.
Yeah.
And 4 that probably took 5 minutes, 6 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, got it.
And I was a quick study, and I read the music.
Yeah.
And I got to know everybody, and our reputation preceded us.
Yeah.
They knew that we were not druggies.
Yep.
There was no booze.
Right.
We were all addicted to coffee and Coca-Cola.
Yeah, right. But
that was about it.
Yeah, professionals.
Exactly.
Can you say, what do you think the top 2 or 3 things, qualities a drummer or any musician need to know, whether in the studio or live?
Well, I used to come up with sayings because I was kind of silly. But I had one saying, if you smile, you stay around a while. If you pout, you're out.
Love it.
And
That's great.
the guys, because a lot of times guys didn't realize, and I saw this happen several times. We'd be setting up for a date. In my case, I had a valet who actually we started his own cartage business. But I never touched a drum. I just walked in, sat down, and played.
Got it.
But guys would walk in. I started contracting quite a bit, and guys would walk in, and I would hear them say, they'd look at the music and say, the same old crap every day. And then I'd have to go over them, and I'd grab them, and I'd take them aside, and I'd say, listen, do you like your new car? Do you like your new home?
Right.
You've got to understand that all these microphones are on, and there was a producer or an artist in the booth talking business, and he heard you say something like, same old crap every day. I don't want that guy in my session. I want a guy that's going to make hits.
Absolutely.
So if you smile, you stay around a while. If you pout, you're out.
That's great.
And that really caught on with a lot of the guys. There were all kinds of little sayings like that.
Yes.
That really worked. And so that was part of our reputation. We're clean guys that did just wonderful work. And that was it.
Well, and the importance of relationships, too, right? I mean, just being a good
the
person.
The camaraderie was unbelievable. We had James, believe it or not, his name is James Bond. Jimmy Bond, one of the great bass players, played upright bass. And also Lyle Ritz from Portland, who was the upright bass player. But our major Fender player was Ray Pullman.
Pullman.
Pohlman. He was a great arranger and a great leader, but one of the great Fender bass players.
Were there other challenges or obstacles for you, Hal, with all of this?
I don't think there were actually obstacles. It's just that certain contractors who kind of ruled the industry, they're the people that hired you. Some of those people, they hated to call us because we were the kids off the street with the Levi's. We didn't wear the three-piece suits or the blue blazers with neckties and carry our own ashtrays or clean our own ashtrays. So those kind of people, I mean, there was nothing you could do about it. There were certain contractors, some of those contractors came to me and said, why won't you accept my calls? I'd love to have you on some movies. And I used to tell them, to be honest with you, records were the business. And if I went in to do a movie, I was actually had to be there from early on, perhaps all day long, working on the movie. And as much as I loved the music, sometimes that music would bring tears to my eyes. I was really, hung up on music. I love music. And these people started offering me all these kind of rewards. Look, I'll give you double scale. I'll pay you. You can get more doubles if you do a movie with me. And so once in a while I would take a movie if it was a slow week or something, but rarely. And recently, the Glenn Campbell movie was the fifth Oscar winner of a movie that I had worked on. Well, I can't even think right now.
Well, certainly The Graduate, right, with Simon and Garfunkel.
Oh, The Graduate, absolutely, The Graduate.
Yes.
True Grit, of course.
Wow, amazing. So you did the drums on True Grit.
On True Grit, on the original True Grit.
Yes.
For an example, I was doing sideline when I first came to Hollywood. Sideline is when they hire a musician to be in a scene and fake that you're playing some pre-recorded music. Maybe for a dance, for a wedding, for a bar mitzvah, for whatever it is. And so you kind of get the bug, and I immediately joined the Screen Actors Guild, and all of a sudden I became one of those guys. And when Steve McQueen did his movie, Baby the Rain Must Fall, I happen to have been on the record, Baby the Rain Must Fall. I think that fella just died recently, one of the great singers. And I became Steve McQueen's drummer.
Wow.
But Glenn and I, who were, some of the forefathers of the Wrecking Crew,
Yeah.
Glenn and I became Steve McQueen's country band, little honky-tonk band.
That's incredible.
And so those things get around to the industry, and they know we're sober, they know we're straight, they know we can play just about anything, just about anything.
Absolutely.
That's why producers were coming from France, from Germany, from England, from everywhere, South America.
Yeah.
It was amazing that we could play, because in those days, you had to learn dance music. And because people danced so much in those days,
Sure.
but they were dancing to Latin music. They were dancing to waltzes. They were dancing to 6/8 kind of music. They were dancing to papa bands and stuff like that.
That's right.
And so drummers like myself, we were heavily trained in all those dances.
Absolutely.
So we could immediately play it. I remember I got a call one time at Universal, and the producer came out at one point and said, "There's a scene right here," and I'm sitting behind barriers just to avoid leakage as the drummer.
Sure.
And of course you would understand that. And the producer came out and said, "Drummer, excuse me, but we're going to be doing some Indian music. There's a downtown Baghdad, India, or something, whatever it was." So he said, "I'd love for you to get on the tablas."
Yes, yeah.
Well, at Universal refused to pay cartage bills to people who had to bring their own guitars or drums or whatever. They would only pay cartage for harps, because a harp was a big instrument and a woman couldn't carry it.
Sure.
And so I go, and they had a room on the music stage, and they had every known instrument. So I run back there to get some tablas, and there are no tablas. Well, I can't go to the producer and say, "We don't have tablas."
Right.
So I rearrange my drums a little bit by tuning them certain ways.
Wow.
And using my sticks a certain way and my fingers.
Yeah.
But we did the scene. And when we finished the scene, this producer came out. We took a 5-minute break. And he came to me and he said, "Listen, young man, that was some of the best tabla work I ever heard in my life." And of course, I never copped out that they weren't tablas.
Yeah,
but had I not had that kind of training and listened to that kind of music, that's some of the hardest music, the music of India.
Absolutely.
It's really tough music.
Yes, yeah.
Anyway, I was lucky that way that I had a good ear and I could just replicate some of that stuff.
Yes, no question. Can we talk about the evolution of your drum set for a minute? Because, when we see the videos and photos of like when you're in the studio with the Beach Boys in the 60s, it's basically a 4-piece kit, if I'm not mistaken.
Exactly. That's what everybody had.
Yeah, and then it got bigger. Say a little bit more about your evolution of your kit.
Well, I'll tell you what happened. David, and your listeners.
Yes.
I'm a rather inventive person. I invented a tambourine that attached to the hi-hat on the drum.
Wow. So
when you're with little bands, you could have it. It was almost like having an extra percussion with it.
Yes.
Percussionist. I had a tambourine that went on there. I had a cowbell that fit on. I made a cowbell holder on the top of my hi-hat, so that I could play eighth notes on the hi-hat and also do the Latin tick, 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 tick.
Yes.
That kind of thing in between those eighth notes. Just that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And when I loved music, and I was writing songs and doing stuff, and I loved the fact that I had a call from a wonderful young producer, unfortunately passed away, by the name of Terry Melcher. And Terry was the son of Doris Day, a wonderful lady at Columbia.
Sure.
We used to do some of her records. But Terry became a producer at Columbia, and we were doing records like The Byrds,
Yes.
Bruce and Terry. I can't even think of all those rock groups and surfing groups and so forth. And anyway, when I got I got a call from Terry that he was going to do a particular Frankie Lane song. We had been working with Frankie Lane, and he said, "Can you do something a little bit different? I really want to do some crazy, freaky drum stuff behind him." And I said, "Well, I'll try." And I took a set of timbales that I had, my Latin timbales, metal timbales, and I put a tom-tom holder on the small one, and I put 3 legs on the large one, and that's what I used for the set of drums. And if you ever hear the record, Don't Make My Baby Blue, you will hear what the drums sounded like. Excuse me. And so I thought, God, if I had an octave of these, I could do all kinds of things.
Yes.
And nobody had those kind of things in those days. So I went out and I experimented with these timbales because if I could hit a timbale, and by keeping the loose head, by hitting it, I would get fall off or decay. So I could hit a drum, boom, 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 boom. And then I decided I'm got to go for an octave so I can really play and tune some octaves.
Yes.
And play and tune. And so then I started working with the Carpenters. And that's when you'll hear some of the drum fills that I was doing. And the Carpenters just loved them. And don't get me wrong, Karen was a fine drummer. She just didn't have the studio chops.
Sure.
She was great on stage, and she was such a sweet lady. We became very good friends, just like Dennis Wilson and I became very good friends.
Yes.
Karen was just a sweetheart, and of course that whole story with Karen is so sad, and she went into that, whatever it was. Anyway, they loved what I was doing, and if you listen to all those hits we did at first. The other thing that you learn about being wanted or known or making a name for yourself, sometimes it works just the opposite, because we were doing different groups, and some of those groups, not all the groups, not the Beach Boys, not the Byrds, and a lot of the great groups that we were doing, Hamilton, Joe Frank, and Reynolds, that just popped out on me. Come Saturday morning, Monday, Mamas and Papas. There were so many of those groups that we were doing. And what would happen is that they would be unknowns, and people like Lou Adler, one of the great producers, or whoever, would bring us in, and we would do a hit record with them, became number one. All of a sudden, they're big stars. Mamas and Papas.
Absolutely.
The big stars.
The Monkees.
And the Monkees, the Partridge Family. But anyway, every time we would approach the 6th or 7th hit, maybe the 8th hit, a lot of these musicians in the groups were thinking, oh, we don't need these guys. We're paying them a lot of money. We can make our own records. We know how to make records now. That was always the beginning of the end of those groups that you never heard of again.
Absolutely.
It's really a shame, and I don't mean that looking for bravo. I mean, it was just our job to make hits, and we loved doing it, and it was great.
And you did it well, right? You did it well.
Exactly. We had so many hit records going. It's just it's just approaching my personal discography is, what is it, 5,500 and something.
Wow. That's
it's really amazing that I'm
Yes.
approaching 6,000.
What helps you keep your passion for music today, Hal?
You know, I don't have a real passion. I do enjoy jazz. One of my favorite, you know, there's certain highlights that you do. I worked with the Count Basie Orchestra, and that's just what a thrill that was,
Sure.
because I was a big Basie fan.
Yeah.
And Bill Basie offered me the band. It goes on and on and on and on.
Wow.
But you know, people like when I did the stuff I did with Jimmy Webb, one of the great young composers.
Yes.
We did MacArthur Park, and we worked with so many wonderful people. Johnny Rivers,
Love John.
who was a youngster who started his own record label.
Yes.
He was one of the first multimillionaires in Hollywood.
Wow.
Young kid from Baton Rouge, Louisiana,
Amazing. Yeah.
who spoke no Italian. The only Italian I've ever known that didn't speak a word of Italian.
You're right. You're right.
But
Yeah.
the kid wrote. They brought me in for a record called "The Poor Side of Town."
Poor
It
Side
was
of
a
Town.
major smash,
Huge hit. Yep.
and I started doing the Whiskey Go Go. That was some of the outside jobs that I would
Yes. Yes.
do once in a while, just special jobs.
Yeah.
The stuff with Johnny Rivers, the stuff with Kenny Rogers. Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Nice. How did the business of music change for you since when you started till even now? What are the biggest changes you've seen?
Well, the biggest change was that the Grammys started the Latin Grammys for the South American element. I mean, I got to work with people like Los Lobos.
Yeah.
There were so many, Latin people and Latin groups.
Yes.
So the Grammys started the Latin Grammys.
It's incredible.
There's a drummer in Miami by the name of Mel Levin, and Mel has become one of the great South American drummers. He and Richie Bravo was a percussionist, a Latin percussionist, and they're just amazing guys. They built little small setups in their homes.
Yeah.
And people come from all over the world when they're doing Latin records, and they're hiring Lee and Richie
Wow.
to do the Latin overdubs.
Yeah.
So these guys sit at home, they get a telephone call, it puts them right on their tape machine, they play the song, they overdub the song, and goodbye, thank you.
Right. It's amazing.
You got the greatest gig in the world.
Right,
It's
yeah.
terrific.
That's
It's terrific.
Yeah. Just in your living room, right? So
It's amazing that, the word gets around.
yes.
Anyway, the other big change after the Latin Grammys started the R&B, because they felt good. And we never did a Beach Boy record unless it felt good. And Brian would call me into the sound booth
Yeah.
every time we finished a good take, and he would say, "Listen to this." If it felt right, I'd say, "Great."
Yeah.
I used to tell guys. When I would tell guys, I said, "Guys, if you make a little mistake somewhere, speak up.
Sure.
Don't let them find this mistake when they start mixing the record
Right.
a couple, 3 days from now or a week from now.
Yes.
Speak up.
Yeah.
I made a little mistake. Let's do one more. Be a man."
That was really open, sort of an open policy of just making a mistake, whether you're in session or wherever.
Well, that was the nice part about the Wrecking Crew. The guys knew we were all very honest about stuff.
Yeah.
And if somebody made a mistake, like I've told the guys before, stick around, listen to a playback. If you hear something that you really don't like,
Yes.
and you want to do it over, speak up.
Right.
Nobody's going to get mad at you.
Right.
And that was part of our reputation as being the good guys. That's just the way it was.
Sure.
There were a lot of musicians out there that just refused to say they made a mistake because they're just great musicians and they don't make mistakes. Well, there are lots of guys that made mistakes.
Sure, of course. That's all part of it.
And unfortunately, what they would find it 3 days later, and then they would call the guy that made the mistake, and they'd call him in, or they'd call another guitar player in to overdub and fix it.
Sure. Yeah.
And then they would tell the contractor, I don't want that guy on my date anymore.
Right.
So a lot of those guys quickly learn, man, if you make a mistake,
Sure.
own up to it, man. Anybody can make a mistake.
Absolutely.
I remember, there's a record, and you would probably remember this record. It's called Be My Baby.
Sure, of course.
It was a record that we did with Phil Spector, and it started out with that bass drum. Boom, 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 bang, boom, 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 bang. Well, and people have asked me about that. Was that a written? No, I don't think it was written. All I remember is that I was so experienced that when we were rehearsing it, I was probably doing it like a drummer. Boom, bing, boom, boom, bing, boom, bing. But it's very possible that when we started rolling, that I was doing the bass drum part, but maybe I dropped a stick.
Right.
I didn't have both sticks to hit the snare and the flare tom together.
Right.
So I just did it until somebody said, hey, I love that.
Yes.
Keep doing it the same way. That's how those things happen. It was just off the top of our heads sometimes.
Yeah, and that's magic.
Some of the best accidents, as you know.
Yes.
Some of the best accidents become the biggest hits.
Absolutely, and that certainly
was. And it happens in film, too, because a lot of times a director will direct something a certain way, and it comes off a different way, and the director says, I love that. Do it that way.
Yeah. How much do you still play now, Hal? Do you play at all?
I rarely play. I have a beautiful new. I am now in the company that I was endorsing they went back to China is what they did, and they were wonderful to me for a number of years. But I have now signed with the DW Drummers Workshop.
Yep.
DW Drums. I've been with the Zildjian cymbals since the 40s.
Wow.
I bought those cymbals when I was a kid.
Amazing.
And what's amazing is that the Zildjian company now has just come out with a new series called Avedis.
Yes.
Avedis was the original Armenian or Turkish guy.
Yes.
And a terrific man.
Yeah.
And they're now making a cymbal that they're calling the warm sound of the 60s.
Yeah.
And those were all my cymbals.
That's fantastic. Yep.
So they just gave me a brand new set of cymbals.
Lovely.
The Avedis cymbals.
Amazing.
And the DW people, I don't know, there's very few drummers that I know that are not playing DW drums. They're just the greatest.
Yeah, they're great drums, no question.
They do some they're engineers. They have some engineers that do unbelievable stuff.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of me when I was trying to be inventive and fix, do stuff. But I love my new drums. DW just presented me with a set of Blue Sparkle.
Oh, beautiful.
Which is what I really started out with Ludwig.
Yeah, nice.
And it was, something that I learned from Ludwig. When I was a Ludwig drummer, I was loyal to Ludwig. When I designed and had the monster set built, the octave, I gave it all to Ludwig.
Wow.
Like a good little boy.
Amazing. Hopefully it's in a museum somewhere, right?
Well, I didn't know from patent designs and engineering, things like that.
Yeah.
And they, of course, thanked me. They were happy that I was their biggest seller for many years.
Yeah, it's incredible.
And they called it the Octopus.
The Octopus.
I was hoping they'd call it the Hal Blaine Monster Set.
Yeah, right, exactly.
They had the Gene Krupa set and the Buddy Rich set. I wanted my set. Don Rickles came to me after opening night, nobody was in the place, in this little place. Slate Brothers in Hollywood. By the third night, you couldn't get in.
Amazing.
And I remember Don Rickles coming to me after the third, because Clark Gable was sitting ringside. And Don Rickles came to me and said, Hal, I can't believe it. Clark Gable wants me in a movie with him. I'm going to be in the movies with him.
Wow.
Because Don Rickles had studied acting. He really wanted to be an actor.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was thrilling for me to be a small part of these guys becoming what they became.
Absolutely. If you weren't a musician, Hal, do you think you would be a stand-up comic because you've got a great sense of humor?
I would probably be fighting the acting bug. I would probably be still working, because if I'd have stuck with acting, I have a hunch that eventually the right thing would have come along.
Yeah.
Because I started to get to know lots of directors and a lot of good people. I just signed a contract with MGM TV, but MGM TV is talking about the possibility of making The Wrecking Crew a series, a TV series.
Oh, wow. That's fantastic. I hope that happens.
So 3 of us signed contracts with MGM.
That sounds great. I'd love to see that.
So you never know. You know, I loved the stand-up thing. I did an album one time for David Grissman, who was famous for his dog music with the Grateful Dead and all these people.
Yes.
And I was going up there and recording with David. I just had a flair for, and maybe it's the ego part of the being a drummer and being an egomaniac.
Sure. Yeah.
Although I never lived on that. I never felt that way for some reason. I mean, it was just not me. It was me and a whole bunch of people.
Amazing career. In closing, Hal, for people who are watching this years down the road, listening to this, what advice do you have for other musicians and the next generation of folks who are coming down the line with music?
You know, I tell musicians who are now studying, don't be afraid to read music. When you study music, it's like you don't just steer a car. You learn how to step on the brakes.
That's right.
You learn how to turn on the radio. You learn how to wave at people.
Right.
You learn how to park.
Yeah. I
mean, you have to learn how to be, especially a studio musician. If you're going to play studios with composers, when people come along and lay a part in front of you and you say, I'm sorry, I don't read music, they're never going to call you again.
That's right.
You're expected to read music. So I tell kids, and I use the analogy of driving a car and say, you know, when you drove a car, the first time you were behind the wheel, you were white-knuckled.
Right.
You were scared.
Yeah.
You were looking for anyone walking or the red light coming up or whatever. And before you know it, once it became second nature, you're waving at people, you've got your arm out, you hit the signals, you're a driver.
Right.
And that's exactly what it is with drumming.
You've really played on the soundtrack of our lives, Hal, and I just really want to thank you for all your music and everything that you've done in the industry.
It was my pleasure. Yeah. Believe me when I tell you it was my pleasure.
Yeah,
I never did a date that I didn't appreciate. It was just absolutely wonderful.
Wow, what an amazing story. Hal Blaine on Musicians on the Record. Such incredible stuff around Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys on Pet Sounds. Giving him gold records, that's incredible. Stuff with Elvis and Sinatra, Hal's earlier story, and with the Wrecking Crew. What a great history lesson for all of us to listen to. Thank you so much to Hal Blaine for being on the show. I'd really love to hear what you think about Hal's story and what your favorite music is by Hal and the Wrecking Crew. Feel free to comment below whether you're watching on Facebook, YouTube, or musiciansontherecord.com. I'm David Ward. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you soon.